You sat down to do it. You told yourself today was different. You had the time, you had the intention, and for one brief moment, you actually believed you were going to follow through. Maybe it was a project that had been sitting on your desk for weeks. Maybe it was a conversation you kept postponing with someone you love. Maybe it was just the quiet, focused hour you promised yourself every morning and almost never actually get. You opened your laptop, or picked up your pen, or took a breath and prepared to begin. And then something happened. A notification. A thought. A sound. Someone needed something. Your mind drifted somewhere you didn't choose to go. And before you even realized it, 20 minutes had passed and you hadn't done a single thing you intended to do. You closed the tab, or put down the pen, or walked away, and somewhere underneath the frustration, there was something quieter and heavier. The feeling that this keeps happening. That no matter how much you want to change, the same pattern finds you. If that feeling is familiar, you are not broken. You are not lazy. You are not uniquely flawed in some way that other people aren't. You are a human being living in a world that was specifically designed, deliberately, scientifically, and profitably, to prevent you from focusing. Every app, every platform, every notification sound was engineered by teams of the most brilliant minds on Earth to capture your attention and hold it. You are not failing at focus. You are fighting a battle you were never given the tools to win. And that is exactly why you are here. Here is the misconception that holds most people back before they even begin. They believe that focus is a personality trait, something you either have or you don't. They watch someone sit down and work for 3 hours without looking up and assume that person is simply built differently. The truth that neuroscience has confirmed, and that this audiobook is built entirely around, is that focus is a trainable skill. It is not a gift. It is not reserved for the disciplined or the gifted or the ones who seem to have it all together. It is a capacity that exists inside you right now, and with the right understanding and the right tools, you can develop it in a way that changes every area of your life. This audiobook is not a productivity hack collection. It is not a list of tips for getting more done in less time. It will not tell you to wake up at 5 in the morning, color code your calendar, or install another app. What it will do is take you inside the brain, inside the patterns, and inside the real reasons why focus feels so difficult, and then give you a clear, honest, deeply practical path forward. This is not about becoming a machine. It is about becoming more fully yourself by reclaiming the one resource that everything else in your life depends on, your attention. Over the course of 10 chapters, you are going to move through 3 distinct phases of transformation. In the first act, you will understand the problem at a depth most people never reach. Not just what distraction is, but what it costs you, what drives it, and why the usual advice doesn't work. In the second act, you will receive the tools, real, science-backed, immediately applicable practices that will begin rewiring how your brain operates. And in the third act, you will learn how to integrate everything into a life where focus is not something you fight for every morning, but something that becomes your natural way of moving through the world. This journey is for you. Not the version of you that has everything figured out. The version sitting here right now, willing to try one more time. That willingness is not weakness. It is the most powerful thing about you. So, take a breath. And let's begin. Chapter 1. The Distraction Epidemic. Why your brain was never built for the modern world. Picture this. You wake up in the morning with genuine intentions. Before your feet even touch the floor, your hand has already found your phone. You tell yourself you are just checking the time. But within 60 seconds you are reading a message, reacting to a post, or scrolling through news that has nothing to do with your life. By the time you put the phone down, something has already shifted. The quiet clarity you had for one brief moment, that window of possibility that exists right after you wake, is gone. Replaced by noise. By other people's priorities. By a low-level mental hum that will follow you through the rest of your day without you ever quite being able to name it. You sit down to work and your mind is already somewhere else. You try to have a real conversation and part of you is still on that screen. You go to bed at night with a vague, uncomfortable feeling that the day happened to you rather than being lived by you. And tomorrow, the whole pattern starts again. This is not a personal failure. This is the distraction epidemic. And you are living inside it. What you just recognized in that scenario is something millions of people feel every single day but rarely stop to examine. There is a reason your focus feels so fragile, so easily broken, so hard to rebuild once it is gone. And when you understand that reason, truly understand it, something important shifts. You stop blaming yourself and start seeing the real battlefield clearly. Because you cannot win a war you do not understand. Here is something that will reframe everything. Your brain is approximately 100,000 years old in its basic architecture. The neural structures governing your attention, your impulse responses, and your threat detection were shaped over thousands of generations by one primary mission: survival. Your ancestors needed a brain that was constantly scanning the environment for change. A rustle in the bushes. A shift in the sky. An unexpected sound. The brain that survived was not the focused brain. It was the distracted brain. The one that could not stay locked onto a single task because staying locked on meant missing the predator approaching from the side. Neuroscientists call this the novelty bias, the brain's deep, hardwired preference for anything new, unexpected, or potentially significant over anything familiar and ongoing. Your brain was literally built to be interrupted. And the modern world has learned, with terrifying precision, exactly how to exploit that. Every notification you receive triggers a small release of dopamine, the same neurochemical involved in reward, pleasure, and motivation. Your brain does not distinguish between a meaningful reward and a meaningless one when that signal fires. It simply registers, something new, something potentially important, go check. Social media platforms, news sites, messaging apps, they were all designed by behavioral scientists who understood this mechanism and built entire systems around triggering it as frequently as possible. You are not weak for falling into these patterns. You are human. But being human in this environment without awareness is the same as being thrown into deep water without knowing how to swim. The water is not evil. But without the right skills, it will take you under. Now let's bring this home to your actual life. Think about the relationship that matters most to you right now: a partner, a parent, a child, a close friend. How many times have you been physically present with that person while being mentally somewhere else entirely? How many conversations have been half conversations because part of your attention was elsewhere? Distraction does not just steal your productivity. It steals your presence. And presence is the currency of every meaningful relationship. When the people you love feel like they cannot fully reach you, they stop trying as hard. And you may not even notice it happening until the distance has grown into something real. In your career, the cost is even more measurable. Research from a University of California, Irvine found that after an interruption, it takes an average of 23 minutes to return to a state of deep focus. 23 minutes. Think about how many interruptions you experience in a single workday. The compounding effect of that lost recovery time is not just hours. Over weeks, months, and years, it is the difference between a career that goes somewhere and one that stays stuck. Between the business idea that becomes a reality and the one that stays a dream. Between the version of you that earns what you are worth and the version that keeps wondering why the gap between effort and reward never seems to close. And inside, in that quieter place that you may not talk about often, chronic distraction does something even more damaging. It disconnects you from yourself. When your attention is always being pulled outward, you lose access to your own thoughts, your own values, your own sense of direction. You start making decisions based on reactions rather than intention. You feel restless but cannot explain why. You feel like you are always moving but never actually arriving anywhere. The Stoic philosopher Marcus Aurelius wrote in his private journals, the ones he never intended for anyone else to read, that the greatest obstacle to living is expectation, which hangs on the future. His deeper point was this: the undisciplined mind is a mind that lives everywhere except the present moment. And a mind that cannot be present cannot build anything that lasts. So what do you do with this? The first tool is what we will call the awareness audit. Here is exactly how it works. For one full day, just one, you set a gentle alarm every 60 minutes. When it goes off, you stop and ask yourself one single question. Where was my attention for the last hour? Not where you intended it to be. Where it actually was. You are not judging yourself. You are simply mapping the territory. Most people who do this are genuinely surprised. Not by how often they were distracted, but by how unaware they were of the distraction while it was happening. You cannot change what you cannot see. The awareness audit makes the invisible visible. The second tool is what we will call the novelty interrupt. Since your brain is wired to chase novelty, you can use that same mechanism intentionally. When you catch yourself about to reach for your phone out of habit, pause for exactly 5 seconds and ask, is this a choice or a reflex? That 5-second gap between the impulse and the action is where your agency lives. You are not fighting your brain. You are inserting a moment of consciousness into a process that was previously running on autopilot. Over time, those moments of consciousness become your default. The reflex becomes a choice. And that is the beginning of real change. Think about what this looks like in the real world. A leader who cannot focus cannot lead. Not because they lack intelligence or vision, but because leadership requires sustained thinking, the ability to sit with a complex problem long enough to find a real solution rather than a reactive one. The most effective executives and entrepreneurs in the world are not the ones who respond the fastest. They are the ones who protect their attention long enough to think clearly. Warren Buffett famously keeps his daily schedule almost completely clear of meetings and external obligations. Not because he is antisocial, but because he understood early that his most valuable asset was not his money. It was his ability to think without interruption. Now here is the nuance that is important. Some people hear about the distraction epidemic and conclude that all technology is the enemy, that the solution is to delete every app, throw away the smartphone, and live in deliberate isolation. That is not what this audiobook is suggesting. Technology is a tool. Like every tool in human history, it can build or it can destroy depending on who is holding it and whether they are holding it consciously. The goal is not to eliminate the modern world. The goal is to stop being unconsciously consumed by it. There is a profound difference between choosing to engage and being compelled to engage. One is power. The other is dependency. And this entire journey is about moving from one to the other. You are not starting from failure. You are starting from awareness. And awareness, real, honest, unflinching awareness, is not the consolation prize on the road to change. It is the first and most powerful step. The moment you truly see the pattern is the moment it begins to lose its grip on you. You have already taken that step by being here. The brain that was built to be distracted is also the brain that built civilization, composed symphonies, and loved deeply across a lifetime. That same brain is yours. And you are only just beginning to understand what it can do when it is finally, fully, brought to attention. In the next chapter, we are going to go deeper, past the noise and into the real cost. Not the surface frustration of a distracted hour, but the quiet, accumulated weight of what distraction has already taken from you, and what it will continue to take if nothing changes. This is where the journey gets honest. And honest is exactly where transformation begins. If this content is already shifting how you see yourself and your focus, take 5 seconds right now to subscribe to this channel. Every week, this channel delivers audiobooks and deep dive content designed to help you think better, live sharper, and build the life your attention deserves. Subscribe now and make sure you never miss what comes next. Chapter 2: The Hidden Cost of a Divided Mind. What distraction is really stealing from you? Think about the last time you felt genuinely proud of yourself. Not the polite, surface-level satisfaction of checking something off a list. The deep, quiet kind of pride that comes from knowing you gave something everything you had. From finishing something that mattered. From being fully present in a moment that deserved your complete attention. Can you remember the last time you felt that? Now think about how long ago that was. For many people, when they sit with that question honestly, the answer is uncomfortable. Not because they are not doing things. They are doing plenty of things. They are busy from morning to night. But busy and present are not the same thing. And somewhere in the gap between the two, something important has quietly slipped away. That feeling, the absence of genuine pride, of real presence, of deep satisfaction, is not a mood. It is a signal. And this chapter is about learning to read it. What you felt in that moment of reflection is something deeper than frustration. It is the beginning of an honest reckoning with what distraction actually costs. Most conversations about focus talk about lost time, about productivity, about efficiency. And while those things matter, they barely scratch the surface of the real damage. The real cost of a divided mind is not measured in hours. It is measured in the moments you cannot get back, the version of yourself you never quite became, and the life that kept waiting for you to show up while you were busy being somewhere else. Psychologists at Harvard University conducted a study using a simple smartphone app to track people's thoughts throughout the day. What they found was striking. Participants reported that their minds were wandering, not focused on what they were actually doing, nearly 47% of the time. Almost half of every waking hour. And here is the part that matters most. The data showed clearly that people were significantly less happy when their minds were wandering, regardless of what they were wandering to. Even pleasant daydreams produced less happiness than focused engagement with an ordinary task. The researchers concluded that a wandering mind is an unhappy mind. Not occasionally. Consistently. The science is telling you something that part of you already knows. The divided mind does not just underperform. It suffers. Now bring this into the places where you live your actual life. In your relationships, the cost of a divided mind is not always dramatic. It rarely announces itself with a single devastating moment. It accumulates slowly, quietly, in the small daily betrayals of presence. Your partner is telling you about their day, and you are half listening while processing something from work. Your child is showing you something they made, and your eyes are on them, but your mind is 3 rooms away. Your friend is opening up about something real, and you are already forming your response before they have finished speaking. None of these moments feel catastrophic in isolation. But relationships are not built or broken in single moments. They are built or broken in the accumulation of thousands of small moments, each one either saying I am here or I am somewhere else. Distraction says, I am somewhere else. And the people who love you feel it, even when they cannot name it. In your career and your finances, the cost is different but equally serious. The divided mind makes poor decisions. Not because it lacks intelligence, but because good decisions require the ability to think something all the way through, to sit with a problem past the point of discomfort, to consider second and third order consequences, to resist the first available answer in favor of the right one. When your attention is fragmented, your thinking is fragmented. You react instead of responding. You choose urgency over importance. You stay busy with tasks that feel productive, but move the needle on nothing that truly matters. Over time, this pattern creates a career that looks active on the surface but stagnant underneath. It creates financial decisions made on impulse rather than intention. And it creates the quiet, grinding frustration of working hard without the results feeling proportional to the effort. Inside, in that private inner world that nobody else fully sees, the cost of chronic distraction is perhaps the most painful of all. The philosopher Blaise Pascal wrote in the 17th century that all of humanity's problems stem from the inability to sit quietly in a room alone. What he was pointing to was this: when we cannot be still, when we cannot be present, we lose access to ourselves. We lose the thread of our own inner voice. We stop knowing what we actually think, what we actually want, what we actually believe. And when you lose that thread, you become vulnerable to being pulled in whatever direction the loudest voice is pointing. You start living by default instead of by design. You make choices that reflect other people's values instead of your own. And beneath all the activity, there is a low, persistent ache that never quite goes away, the ache of a life that feels like it belongs to someone else. The concept at the heart of this chapter is what we will call attention debt. Just like financial debt accumulates interest over time, attention debt is what builds when you consistently spend your focus on things that do not matter at the expense of things that do. Every time you give your attention to something that does not align with your values, your relationships, or your goals, you are making a withdrawal from a reserve that is not unlimited. And the interest on that debt is paid not in money but in missed opportunities, weakened relationships, undeveloped potential, and the slow erosion of your sense of self. The mechanism behind this is rooted in what neuroscientists call directed attention fatigue, the depletion of the brain's capacity for voluntary focus through overuse and misdirection. Your attention is not just a metaphor for what you care about. It is a finite neurological resource. And like any finite resource, how you spend it determines what your life becomes. So what do you actually do with this understanding? The first tool is called the cost mapping exercise. Here is how it works. Take a quiet moment, away from your phone, away from noise, and ask yourself 3 honest questions. In my most important relationship, what has my divided attention already cost me? In my career or finances, what opportunity have I missed or underperformed on because my focus was fragmented? And inside myself, what kind of person am I not yet becoming because my attention keeps going somewhere other than my own growth? You are not doing this to feel bad. You are doing this to feel the full weight of the truth. Because the truth, when you let yourself feel it completely, creates the kind of urgency that no motivational quote can manufacture. The second tool is called the one presence practice. Choose one interaction today, just one, where you make a deliberate, conscious commitment to be completely present. Not mostly present. Not present until your phone buzzes. Completely present. Put the phone face down in another room. Make eye contact. Listen not just to the words, but to the feeling behind the words. Be there in a way that the other person can actually feel. Then notice what happens, both in them and in you. This is not a grand gesture. It is a small act with a disproportionately large return. And once you experience what genuine presence creates in a relationship, in a conversation, in your own sense of aliveness, you will understand at a felt level what you have been missing. That felt understanding is more powerful than any concept this chapter can deliver. In the real world, the leaders and creators who produce work that genuinely matters are not the ones who do the most things. They are the ones who do fewer things with complete attention. Cal Newport, the author and computer scientist who has studied deep work for over a decade, observed that the ability to perform deep, focused work is becoming increasingly rare at the same time it is becoming increasingly valuable. The people who can focus, truly focus, in an age of distraction are not just more productive. They are operating in a category that most people have vacated without even realizing it. That category is available to you. Here is the important nuance. This chapter is not asking you to feel guilty about every distracted moment you have ever had. Guilt is not the point, and it is not useful. The point is clarity. There is a significant difference between looking at the cost of something clearly and judging yourself for it. A doctor who tells you that your diet is affecting your health is not attacking you. They are giving you information that allows you to make a better choice. That is exactly what this chapter is doing. You cannot choose differently until you see clearly what your current choices are actually producing. Self-awareness is not self-punishment. It is self-respect. What you have done in this chapter is something most people never do. You have stopped long enough to look at the real ledger, not just the surface irritations of a distracted day, but the accumulated weight of what a divided mind costs over a lifetime. That look takes courage. And courage, here at the beginning of your journey, is the most important thing you could possibly bring. You are not behind. You are not too far gone. You are exactly where you need to be to begin building something different. Something focused. Something real. Something entirely yours. In the next chapter, we go even deeper. Because before you can eliminate distraction, you need to know exactly what you are dealing with. Not all distractions are created equal. There are 7 distinct types pulling at your attention right now, And some of the most powerful ones are hiding in plain sight, disguised as the very things you think are helping you. Chapter 3: Know Your Enemy. The 7 types of distraction that are wrecking your focus. Have you ever sat down to do something important, gotten through the first few minutes reasonably well, and then found yourself doing something completely different without any clear memory of deciding to switch? Not because someone interrupted you. Not because an emergency arose. But because your mind simply drifted. And the strange part is not that it happened. The strange part is that you did not notice it happening until you were already somewhere else entirely. You look up and realize you have been reorganizing your desk, or reading an article about something you were not even looking for, or replaying a conversation from 3 days ago, and the work you sat down to do is still exactly where you left it, untouched, waiting. And the worst part is the familiar sigh that follows. The quiet resignation that says this is just how I am. But it is not how you are. It is what is happening to you. And once you can see it clearly, it loses most of its power. That sigh, that resigned acceptance of a pattern you feel you cannot control, is exactly what this chapter is here to dissolve. The reason most focus advice fails is not because it is wrong. It is because it is incomplete. It treats distraction as a single thing, a uniform enemy with one face and one strategy. But distraction is not one thing. It is a family of related but distinct forces, each one operating through a different mechanism, each one requiring a different response. Trying to solve all 7 types of distraction with a single technique is like trying to treat 7 different illnesses with the same medicine. Some of it might help. Most of it will not touch the real problem. This chapter is going to name all 7, explain exactly how each one works, and give you the awareness you need to recognize them in real time. Because recognition, as you are learning, is always the first act of transformation. The first type is what behavioral scientists call external sensory distraction. This is the most obvious category: the notification, the noise, the colleague who stops at your desk, the television in the background, the message that pings just as you find your rhythm. These are the distractions most productivity advice addresses because they are visible, measurable, and relatively easy to manage with environmental changes. But here is what most people miss about external distractions. The sound itself is rarely the problem. It is the meaning your brain assigns to the sound. A notification does not steal your focus. Your brain's interpretation of that notification as potentially important is what does. Understanding this distinction matters because it shifts the solution from simply silencing the world, which is often impossible, to changing your relationship with incoming signals. One does not require a perfect environment. The other does. The second type is digital loop distraction. This is the specific trap of the modern attention economy. The scroll that never ends, the autoplay that never pauses, the algorithm that is optimized to keep you watching, reading, and clicking for as long as mechanically possible. What makes digital loop distraction uniquely dangerous is that it does not feel like distraction. It feels like engagement. You feel like you are doing something. You are reading, watching, responding, reacting. But none of it is moving you toward anything you actually chose. Neuroscientist Anna Lemke, in her research on dopamine and compulsive behavior, describes this as dopamine flooding, the state where the reward system is so overstimulated by rapid, low-effort inputs that it loses sensitivity to the slower, deeper rewards of real accomplishment. The work that used to feel satisfying starts to feel tedious. The relationship that used to feel engaging starts to feel boring. Not because those things changed, but because your brain's reward threshold has been recalibrated by a constant diet of cheap dopamine. The third type is task-switching distraction. This is the distraction that wears the mask of productivity. You are not scrolling. You are not idle. You are working, just on 6 different things at once. Research from Stanford University found that people who regularly multitask are actually worse at filtering irrelevant information, worse at managing their working memory, and worse at switching between tasks than people who rarely multitask. The very habit that feels like efficiency is eroding the capacity for it. Every time you switch tasks, your brain incurs what cognitive scientists call a switching cost, a period of reduced performance as it disengages from one context and re-engages with another. Multiply that cost by dozens of switches per day, and you begin to understand why the day can feel exhausting while very little of genuine depth actually got done. The fourth type is emotional avoidance distraction. This one is the most honest and the most uncomfortable to name. Sometimes you reach for the phone not because you are curious about what is on it, but because you are trying to escape something you do not want to feel. The anxiety about a conversation you need to have. The fear underneath a project you keep postponing. The grief, the loneliness, the uncertainty that is sitting quietly in the background of your day. Distraction in this form is not laziness. It is self-protection. The psychologist Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi, who spent decades studying states of deep engagement and flow, noted that the primary reason people resist entering a state of focused work is not the difficulty of the work itself, but the emotional discomfort of sitting with their own mind long enough to begin. The distraction is the exit door from that discomfort. And as long as the exit door is there, many people will take it, not because they are weak, but because they are human. The fifth type is relationship and social distraction. These are the interruptions that come from the people in your life, the text that needs a response, the colleague who needs a moment, the family member who needs your attention right now. What makes this category particularly complex is the guilt that comes with setting boundaries around it. You are not supposed to ignore the people you love in the name of focus. And yet, if you are always available to everyone, you are never truly available to yourself or to the work that requires your deepest attention. The Stoics had a precise framework for this. Epictetus taught that the wise person makes a clear distinction between what is within their control and what is not, and invests their energy accordingly. Responding to every social demand the moment it arises is not connection. It is reaction. And reaction is the enemy of intention. The sixth type is future and past mental distraction. This is the internal noise of a mind that refuses to stay in the present. The rehearsal of conversations that have not happened. The replay of situations that already have. The planning, worrying, regretting, and anticipating that runs constantly in the background like a program you forgot to close. Neuroscience research on the default mode network, the brain's resting state system that activates when you are not focused on an external task, shows that this network is the neurological home of mind wandering. It is active, energy-consuming, and when unregulated, it generates a kind of mental static that makes deep focus extremely difficult. The mind that is always somewhere else in time cannot be fully anywhere in the present. The seventh type is identity distraction. This is the deepest and least discussed category. It is the distraction that comes from not knowing clearly who you are, what you stand for, and what you are actually trying to build. When your identity is unclear, every new idea feels potentially important. Every opportunity feels potentially worth chasing. Every conversation, every trend, every possibility competes for your attention with roughly equal weight because you have not yet established the internal hierarchy that tells you what matters and what does not. Without a clear sense of purpose and direction, focus has nowhere to land. And you end up scattered not because you lack discipline, but because you lack the anchor that discipline requires to function. The tool for immediately working with this understanding is called the Distraction Typing Journal. For 3 days, every time you catch yourself distracted, you write down one word identifying which of the 7 types it was. External, digital, switching, emotional, social, temporal, identity. You do not analyze it. You do not judge it. You simply name it. After 3 days, look at the pattern. Most people find that 2 or 3 types dominate their distraction landscape. Knowing your dominant types is not just interesting. It is strategically essential, because the chapters that follow are going to give you targeted tools for each category, and knowing which ones apply to you most will help you apply those tools with precision. The second tool is called the 5-second name and pause. When you notice a distraction arising, any type, you say its name silently to yourself. Emotional avoidance. Digital loop. Task switching. Then you pause for 5 seconds before acting on it. Naming activates the prefrontal cortex, the brain's executive control center, which creates a brief window of rational choice between the impulse and the behavior. This is not suppression. It is awareness. And awareness, as every chapter of this audiobook is confirming, is the foundation of every other skill. Think about what this awareness means in your real life. In a relationship, being able to recognize that you are reaching for your phone not out of genuine need, but out of emotional avoidance changes everything about how you show up. In your career, being able to identify that what looks like productive multitasking is actually task-switching distraction allows you to restructure your workday in a way that produces real results. In your inner world, being able to see that the restless mental noise of future and past distraction is a neurological pattern, not a personal failing, gives you the compassion and the clarity to begin working with your mind instead of against it. Here is the nuance that matters. Naming these 7 types is not about creating a new framework to feel bad inside. Some people hear a list like this and immediately begin cataloging every distraction they have ever experienced with a kind of anxious thoroughness that is itself a form of distraction. The point is not to monitor yourself obsessively. The point is to develop what psychologists call metacognitive awareness, the ability to observe your own thinking as it happens. That ability is not a burden. It is one of the most powerful cognitive tools a human being can possess. Use it with lightness, not severity. You came into this chapter with a sigh, that resigned familiar feeling of a pattern that seemed beyond your control. You are leaving it with something different. You are leaving it with a map. Not a perfect map. Not a finished map. But a map detailed enough to begin navigating by. The enemy is no longer a formless fog. It has 7 faces, 7 mechanisms, and 7 points of vulnerability. And now that you can see them clearly, you are already more powerful than you were when this chapter began. Act 1 of this journey is complete. You have seen the distraction epidemic for what it is. You have felt the full weight of what it costs. And now you know exactly what you are dealing with. In the next chapter, everything changes. We move from awareness into transformation. From understanding the problem to rewiring the brain that holds the solution. The neuroscience of focus is not complicated, but it is extraordinary. And what you are about to learn about your own brain will change the way you see what you are capable of, permanently. Chapter 4, The Neuroscience of Focus, How to Rewire Your Brain for Deep Attention. Close your eyes for a moment and think about someone in your life who seems to focus effortlessly. Someone who sits down to work and actually works. Someone who is present in a conversation in a way that makes you feel like the only person in the room. Someone who moves through their day with a quality of intention that you have admired and quietly envied and perhaps told yourself you simply do not have. Now here is the question that most people never think to ask about that person. Were they born that way? Because if the answer is yes, if focus is simply a trait some people have and others do not, then this conversation is inspiring but ultimately hopeless. But if the answer is no, if what that person has is something that was built, trained, and developed over time through specific and learnable mechanisms, then everything changes. Not just what you believe about focus. What you believe about yourself. The answer is no. And what follows is the science that proves it. What you are about to understand is not abstract theory. It is the operating manual for the most sophisticated instrument you will ever own, your brain. And once you understand how it actually works, you will never again look at your struggles with focus the same way. Because those struggles are not character flaws. They are the predictable output of a system that has been running without the right inputs. Change the inputs and the system changes. That is not optimism. That is neuroscience. The single most important concept in this chapter is neuroplasticity. For most of the 20th century, scientists believed the adult brain was essentially fixed, that after a certain age, the neural architecture you had was the neural architecture you were stuck with. That belief has been comprehensively dismantled. We now know that the brain retains the ability to form new neural connections, strengthen existing ones, and reorganize its own structure in response to experience throughout the entire human lifespan. Neuroplasticity is not a metaphor for the possibility of change. It is the literal physical mechanism through which change happens. Every time you practice focusing, every time you catch your mind wandering and gently return it to the task at hand, you are not just completing a mental exercise. You are physically strengthening the neural pathways associated with sustained attention. You are building the focused brain one repetition at a time, the same way a muscle is built one contraction at a time. The specific brain region most critical to focused attention is the prefrontal cortex, located just behind your forehead. This is the seat of what neuroscientists call executive function, your ability to plan, prioritize, inhibit impulsive responses, and sustain deliberate attention over time. When your prefrontal cortex is strong, regulated, and well-rested, you can choose where your attention goes and hold it there with relatively little effort. When it is fatigued, stressed, or chronically overstimulated, which describes the daily state of most people living in the modern world, it loses its regulatory power. The more primitive, reactive parts of your brain take over. And those parts are not interested in your goals. They are interested in novelty, comfort, and the path of least resistance. Understanding this is not discouraging. It is liberating. Because prefrontal cortex function is directly improvable through specific, consistent practices that require no special talent, no expensive equipment, and no dramatic life overhaul. Now let this land in your actual life. In your relationships, a weakened prefrontal cortex means you react rather than respond. You say the thing you immediately regret. You misread what someone needs and respond to your interpretation rather than their reality. You are physically present but emotionally somewhere else, and the people who love you feel the absence even when they cannot explain it. In your career and finances, prefrontal fatigue means your decision-making deteriorates throughout the day. The choices you make at 9 in the morning are genuinely different in quality from the choices you make at 4 in the afternoon, not because the problems are different, but because the brain making the decisions has been depleted. Research on judicial decision-making found that judges were significantly more likely to grant favorable rulings early in the day and after breaks than late in sessions, not because of the merits of the cases, but because of the state of their attention. Your financial decisions, your professional judgments, your strategic thinking, all of them are subject to the same depletion dynamic. And inside, in your own experience of yourself, chronic prefrontal fatigue creates the feeling of being out of control, of being lived by your reactions rather than living by your intentions, of knowing what you should do and consistently doing something else. That gap between knowing and doing is not a moral failure. It is a neurological one. And it is closable. The concept that changes everything here is what we will call the attention muscle principle. Focus is not a state you either enter or do not enter. It is a capacity that exists on a spectrum, and like every spectrum-based capacity, it responds to training. The mechanism is Hebbian learning, the neuroscientific principle often summarized as neurons that fire together wire together. Every time a specific pattern of neural activation is repeated, the connection between those neurons becomes stronger, faster, and more automatic. This means that every single time you practice redirecting your attention, every time you notice the drift and choose to return, you are not failing at focus. You are succeeding at training it. The drift is not the problem. The drift is the repetition. The return is the exercise. Most people feel defeated every time their mind wanders during an attempt to focus. The truth is that the wandering followed by the conscious return is the entire workout. You are not doing it wrong. You have simply been misreading what right looks like. The first tool this understanding gives you is called focused attention meditation, and before you decide this is not for you, hear the mechanism. You do not need incense, a cushion, or 30 minutes of silence. You need 5 minutes and a single point of attention, your breath. Here is the exact practice. Sit comfortably, set a 5-minute timer, and place your attention on the physical sensation of breathing. Not the concept of breathing. The actual sensation, the air entering, the chest rising, the pause, the release. When your mind wanders, and it will because that is what minds do, you simply notice it has wandered and return your attention to the breath. That is the entire practice. Each return is one repetition of the attention muscle. Research from neuroscientist Sarah Lazar at Harvard Medical School showed that consistent practitioners of this simple practice demonstrated measurable increases in cortical thickness in regions associated with attention and interoceptive awareness. You are not relaxing. You are training. 5 minutes a day, done consistently, begins producing measurable neurological changes within 8 weeks. The second tool is called the single tasking protocol. For one defined block of time each day, start with just 25 minutes. You commit to one task and one task only. Phone in another room, not just face down. One browser tab open, not 10. One document, one problem, one direction of thought. When the urge to switch arises, and it will arise strongly, especially in the first few days, you note it without acting on it and return to the single task. The 25-minute duration is not arbitrary. It is borrowed from the Pomodoro technique, which is built around the natural rhythm of focused attention before voluntary fatigue sets in. But the deeper principle is this: you are not just completing a task. You are teaching your brain that sustained single focus is safe, rewarding, and achievable. Each completed session rewires the expectation, and rewired expectations become new defaults. In the real world, this understanding separates the people who intend to change from the people who actually do. Kobe Bryant, one of the most focused athletes in the history of professional sport, did not achieve his legendary concentration through willpower alone. He trained his attention the same way he trained his body, deliberately, repeatedly, and with a clear understanding of the mechanism behind the result. He described his mental training as more important than his physical training because, as he put it, the body follows the mind. Every top performer in every high-stakes field, from surgery to chess to entrepreneurship, shares one common characteristic. They have trained their attention intentionally. Not because they were gifted with it, but because they understood it was trainable. Here is the nuance that is critical to understand. Neuroplasticity is real and it is powerful, but it is not instant and it is not linear. The brain changes through consistent repetition over time, not through a single intense effort followed by a long break. This means that doing the focused attention practice for 3 hours on a Sunday and then not returning to it for 2 weeks will produce far less change than doing it for 5 minutes every single morning. Consistency is the active ingredient. Not intensity. Not duration. Consistency. The brain responds to patterns. Give it a consistent pattern of focused attention practice, and it will reorganize itself around that pattern. Give it an inconsistent burst followed by a long absence, and it will default back to its previous wiring. This is not a discouragement. It is a clarification of where to put your energy. You came into this chapter wondering if the person who focuses effortlessly was simply built differently than you. You are leaving it knowing the truth. They built it. And so can you. The brain you have right now, the one that drifts, that scrolls, that struggles to stay on a single thought for more than a few minutes, is not your permanent brain. It is your current brain. And your current brain, as you now understand, is a living, adaptable, trainable system that is waiting for you to give it the right inputs. You are not behind the focused version of yourself. You are on your way to becoming them. One return at a time. If this audiobook is already shifting something real in how you understand your own mind, drop a comment below right now. Type the number 1 if you have been struggling with focus for years and this chapter just gave you a new way to see it. Type the number 2 if you are just beginning this journey and you are feeling genuinely hopeful for the first time in a while. Your response tells this channel that this content matters, and it helps bring this work to the people who need it most. Chapter 5, Radical Clarity. You can't focus on everything, so what actually matters? You have probably had this experience. You are not distracted in the obvious way. You are not scrolling. You are not idle. You are genuinely working, genuinely trying, genuinely putting in the hours. But at the end of the day, or the end of the week, or the end of the month, you look at what you actually produced and something feels off. The effort was real, but the results do not reflect it. The energy was there, but it seems to have dispersed in every direction without landing anywhere with real force. You are not lazy. You are not unfocused in the traditional sense. But you are spread thin across so many things that none of them ever get the concentrated attention required to actually move. And beneath the exhaustion of all that effort without proportional return, there is a question that is harder to sit with than it looks. What am I actually trying to build? That question is not a simple one. But the inability to answer it clearly is costing you more than you realize. Here is what this chapter is about. Everything you have learned so far about distraction, attention, and the brain becomes dramatically more powerful when it is aimed at something specific. Focus without direction is like a magnifying glass held under a cloudy sky. The mechanism is real, but the conditions are wrong and nothing catches fire. Radical clarity is the clear sky that makes the magnifying glass lethal. And most people never develop it, not because they are incapable of it, but because nobody ever taught them that clarity is a skill, not a stroke of luck. The Stoic philosopher Seneca wrote in one of his most famous letters that people are not disturbed by things but by their opinions about things. But his deeper insight, woven through decades of his writing, was about the catastrophic cost of an undirected life. He wrote with striking directness that to be everywhere is to be nowhere. He was not speaking abstractly. He was describing the experience of a mind and a life so divided across competing demands, pleasures, and obligations that it never fully inhabits any of them. 2,000 years later, neuroscience has given us the biological mechanism behind his observation. The brain's attentional system operates like a spotlight. It can illuminate one thing with tremendous power or scatter its light across many things with greatly diminished effect. You cannot have both breadth and depth simultaneously. Every choice to focus on everything is a choice to focus on nothing with sufficient force to change it. This lands in your relationships in a specific and painful way. When you do not have clarity about what matters most to you, you tend to give your best attention to whatever is loudest rather than whatever is most important. The urgent email gets the focus that your most important relationship deserved. The social obligation that feels difficult to decline gets the time that your personal growth required. The people in your life who speak the quietest, who love you without demanding your attention, often receive the least of it. Not because you love them less, but because without clarity, volume determines priority. And volume is almost never the right measure of what deserves your focus. In your career and finances, the absence of clarity creates what we can call opportunity scatter, the state of perpetually chasing multiple directions without going deep enough in any single one to produce a breakthrough result. You start the course and then start another one. You launch the project and then get excited about a different project. You build momentum in one direction and then redirect it before it has a chance to compound. Every pivot feels justified in the moment because every new direction genuinely looks promising. But the pattern underneath the pivots is not strategic flexibility. It is the absence of a clear enough north to make the cost of changing direction feel real. And in your inner world, living without clarity is one of the most reliable sources of chronic anxiety that exists. When you do not know what you are building, every decision carries the full weight of existential uncertainty. Even small choices feel heavy because without a clear framework for what matters, you have no reliable way to evaluate them. The cognitive and emotional load of that constant low-grade uncertainty is exhausting in a way that is rarely named but almost universally felt. The concept at the center of this chapter is what we will call the North Star principle. Your North Star is not your to-do list. It is not your quarterly goals. It is not even your 5-year plan. It is the single most important thing you are trying to create, become, or contribute during this season of your life, specific enough to guide daily decisions, meaningful enough to sustain motivation through difficulty, and honest enough to actually be yours rather than borrowed from someone else's definition of success. The mechanism behind why this works is rooted in what psychologists call implementation intention, the research finding that people who specify not just what they want to achieve but exactly what it looks like in concrete, specific terms are dramatically more likely to follow through than those who hold vague general aspirations. Vagueness is not humility. It is not openness. In the context of focus and execution, Vagueness is the enemy. Specificity is the ally. Here is the important distinction that most clarity frameworks miss. Your North Star does not have to be permanent. It does not have to be the answer to every question about your life's ultimate meaning. It simply has to be true right now, clear enough, specific enough, and meaningful enough to serve as the filter through which you evaluate where your attention goes today. In one season of life, your North Star might be rebuilding a relationship that has been damaged by your absence. In another, it might be building the financial foundation that will give your family genuine security. In another, it might be developing a skill that will change the trajectory of your career. None of these is more valid than the others. What matters is that you have one clear, honest, specific answer to the question of what this season is for. Because when you have that answer, everything else becomes easier to evaluate. Does this deserve my attention or not? Is this aligned with what I am building, or is it noise dressed up as opportunity? The first tool this chapter gives you is called the North Star Statement. Here is the exact process. Set aside 30 minutes of genuine solitude, no phone, no background noise, nothing competing for your attention. At the top of a blank page, write this question. If 1 year from now I look back at this period of my life feeling genuinely proud, what will I have done, built, or become? Write without editing. Write without judging. Write everything that comes up. Then read back through what you wrote and find the single thread that runs through all of it, the one thing that, if it happened, would make everything else feel worthwhile. Write that thing as one clear, specific sentence. That sentence is your North Star statement. Keep it somewhere you will see it every morning. Not as pressure. As orientation. The compass does not judge you for where you currently are. It simply shows you which direction is north. The second tool is called the clarity filter. Once you have your North Star statement, you apply it as a decision-making filter to every significant demand on your attention. The question is simple. Does this move me toward my North Star or away from it? Not is this interesting. Not is this urgent. Not will saying no to this feel uncomfortable. Does it move me toward or away from what I have decided matters most right now? This filter will not make every decision easy, but it will make every decision clearer. And clarity, even when the answer is uncomfortable, is always better than the fog of indecision. A clear no is a gift to yourself. A vague yes to everything is a slow erosion of everything. In the real world, this principle is at the heart of every story of sustained extraordinary achievement. Steve Jobs, when he returned to Apple in 1997, did not try to do everything. He cut the company's product line by 70%. He said no to hundreds of things that were individually interesting and potentially profitable in order to say a complete, unconditional yes to the few things that could make Apple extraordinary. The result was not a company that did less. It was a company that created some of the most transformative products in the history of technology. The clarity was not the finishing line. It was the starting line. What Jobs understood intuitively, and what the science of attention confirms, is that the decision about what not to focus on is just as important as the decision about what to focus on. Possibly more important. Now here is the nuance this chapter requires. Radical clarity is not rigidity. There is a version of this principle that people apply with such severity that it becomes its own prison, where every spontaneous connection, every unexpected opportunity, every moment of joyful unplanned engagement is rejected because it does not fit neatly into the North Star framework. That is not focus. That is fear wearing the costume of discipline. True clarity is flexible enough to recognize when something unexpected is genuinely aligned with your deeper values, even if it was not in the plan. The clarity filter is a tool, not a tyrant. It is designed to serve your growth, not to constrain your aliveness. The goal is a life that feels both intentional and free, and those two things, when clarity is real and honest, are not opposites. They are the same thing. You began this chapter exhausted by effort that was not producing proportional results. You are ending it with something that changes the equation entirely. Not more effort. Not better time management. Clarity. The kind of clarity that makes every hour of focus worth more than 10 hours of scattered activity. The kind that makes the hard decisions easier and the easy distractions easier to decline. The kind that turns the magnifying glass toward the sun and finally, deliberately, lets something catch fire. Your North Star is not out there somewhere waiting to be discovered. It is already inside you, waiting to be named. Name it. And watch what your focus becomes when it finally has somewhere real to go. In the next chapter, you're going to learn how to build the world around that clarity. Literally redesigning your environment so that your most important work becomes the path of least resistance rather than the path of most struggle. The insight is powerful. The application is immediate. And for many people, it produces results faster than anything else in this entire audiobook. Chapter 6. Architect your environment. Design your life to make focus unavoidable. Walk into any casino in the world and pay attention to what is missing. There are no clocks on the walls. There are no windows showing daylight or darkness. The lighting is carefully calibrated to feel neither like morning nor evening. The sounds are engineered to be stimulating without being jarring. The pathways wind and curve in ways that make exits feel distant and gaming floors feel central. None of this is accidental. Every single element of a casino's physical environment has been deliberately designed by teams of behavioral psychologists and architects to produce one specific outcome: to keep you inside, engaged, and spending for as long as possible. The environment is doing the work. Not your willpower. Not your intentions. The environment. And here is what makes this relevant to your life far beyond a casino floor. Every environment you inhabit every day is shaping your behavior in ways you are almost certainly not aware of. The question is not whether your environment is influencing your focus. It absolutely is. The question is whether you designed it or whether it designed you. That question, did you design your environment or did it design you, is one of the most practically powerful questions this entire audiobook will ask you. What most people do when they struggle with focus is try harder. They make stronger commitments, set firmer intentions, repeat more motivating mantras. And then they sit down in the exact same environment that has been undermining their focus for months or years and wonder why the same patterns keep repeating. The missing insight is this: willpower is a depleting resource. Environment is a permanent infrastructure. Trying to maintain focus through willpower alone in an environment designed to fragment your attention is the cognitive equivalent of trying to run uphill on ice through sheer determination. It is possible for short bursts. It is not sustainable. But when you redesign the environment, when you change the physical, digital, and social architecture of your daily life, you shift the default. The focused behavior becomes the easy behavior. And the distracted behavior becomes the one that requires effort. Behavioral scientist B.J. Fogg at Stanford University has spent decades studying the relationship between environment and behavior. His core finding, which he calls the Tiny Habits Framework, is built on one foundational insight: behavior is far more a function of environment than of motivation. People do not consistently do what they intend to do. They consistently do what their environment makes easiest to do. This is not a cynical observation about human weakness. It is a precise and liberating description of how behavior actually works. If your phone is on your desk, you will check it. Not because you are undisciplined, but because proximity creates automatic behavior. If healthy food is at eye level in your refrigerator and less healthy options are stored out of sight, you will eat better. Not because your willpower improved, but because your environment changed. The same principle applies to focus with equal power. The focused version of you is not a different person with more discipline. It is the same person in a better designed environment. Think about what this means in your relationships. The environments you and the people you love inhabit together are either creating connection or eroding it. A bedroom with two people each on separate devices is an environment designed by default to produce parallel isolation rather than genuine intimacy. A dinner table where phones are absent, not silenced, absent, is an environment that creates the conditions for real conversation. You do not have to convince yourself to be present at that table. The environment removes the primary competitor for your attention. A couple who creates a weekly ritual of shared, undistracted time is not relying on the inspiration to connect landing on the same night for both of them. They have built the structure that makes connection the default. The environment does the heavy lifting that good intentions alone almost never sustain. In your career and finances, environmental architecture is the difference between a professional who consistently produces deep, high-quality work and the one who is perpetually busy but rarely breakthrough. Research from organizational psychologist Adam Grant at Wharton found that the most productive knowledge workers share one common environmental practice: they batch their communication. Rather than keeping email and messaging apps open throughout the day and responding to every incoming message as it arrives, they designate specific windows for communication and protect the rest of their time for focused, uninterrupted work. This single environmental adjustment, changing when and how communication tools are accessible, produced dramatic improvements in the depth and quality of their output. Not because they became more motivated, because they changed the structure of their environment. The concept at the heart of this chapter is what we will call environmental architecture, the deliberate, intentional design of your physical space, digital environment, and social context to make your most important behaviors easier and your most destructive behaviors harder. The mechanism behind why this works so powerfully is rooted in what psychologists call choice architecture, the understanding that the way options are presented and arranged in an environment fundamentally shapes which options get chosen, often without the chooser being consciously aware of the influence. You are always choosing within an architecture. The only question is whether you built that architecture or whether it was built for you by people whose interests may have nothing to do with yours. The first tool is called the friction audit and addition. Here is exactly how it works in 2 steps. Step 1 is the friction audit. Walk through your typical day and identify the 3 behaviors that most consistently derail your focus. For most people, these include checking the phone immediately upon waking, opening social media during work hours, and multitasking between communication apps and focused work. For each behavior, ask honestly, what makes this so easy? Usually the answer is proximity and zero friction. The phone is on the nightstand. The app is 1 tap away. The browser tab is already open. Step 2 is friction addition. Deliberately add steps between yourself and each of these behaviors. Move the phone charger to another room so it does not spend the night beside your bed. Delete social media apps from your phone so accessing them requires logging in through a browser, a small friction that interrupts the automatic reflex. Use a website blocker during your designated focus hours so that distraction requires an active override rather than a passive surrender. You are not relying on willpower. You are building a system where the distracted choice costs more effort than the focused choice. Over time, the system does what willpower cannot. It holds even on the days when your motivation is low. The second tool is called the focus zone design. This is the creation of one specific physical space, however modest, that is dedicated exclusively to your most important focused work. It does not need to be a separate room. It can be a specific chair, a corner of a desk, a particular spot at a library or coffee shop. What matters is the exclusivity and the consistency. This space is used for focused work and nothing else. No casual browsing. No phone scrolling. No eating while half-working. No watching videos in the background. When you enter this space, you work. When you want to do something else, you leave the space first. The reason this works is rooted in associative memory. Your brain links environments with behaviors through repeated experience. Over time, entering your focus zone triggers the neurological state associated with focused work automatically, the same way walking into a gym can trigger a shift in your mental and physical readiness before you have done a single exercise. You are programming your brain through environmental cues. And programmed environments are far more reliable than daily motivation. In the real world, this principle operates at every level of performance. Darwin did his best thinking on a specific gravel path at his estate in Kent, a path he walked so consistently for focused reflection that his family called it the thinking path. He did not wait for inspiration to arrive. He built the environment that made inspiration structurally likely. Novelist Maya Angelou famously rented a sparse hotel room for her writing. No decorations, no distractions, just a legal pad, a dictionary, and a Bible, not because she could not write at home, but because she understood that the environment she was in determined the quality of thought she could access. These are not quirky habits of eccentric geniuses. They are sophisticated applications of environmental architecture by people who understood, intuitively or explicitly, that the environment shapes the mind. Here is the nuance that prevents this chapter from becoming a source of perfectionist paralysis. Environmental architecture does not require a perfect setup before you can begin. Some people hear this principle and conclude that they need to redesign their entire home office, buy new furniture, install specialized lighting, and achieve a state of environmental perfection before they can start doing focused work. That is procrastination dressed as preparation. The minimum viable focus zone is a cleared surface, a closed door or pair of headphones, a phone in another room, and a single task in front of you. Start there. Build from there. The architecture improves as the practice deepens. What matters is not the sophistication of the environment. It is the intentionality behind it. You walked into this chapter in an environment that was probably designed by habit, convenience, and default rather than by deliberate intention. You are leaving it with the understanding that your environment is not a neutral backdrop to your life. It is an active participant in every decision you make, every habit you form, and every level of focus you can access. And unlike your emotions, unlike your past, unlike the circumstances that are genuinely outside your control, your environment is almost entirely within your power to redesign. That power is not small. In a world where most of the forces shaping your behavior are invisible and external, the ability to consciously architect the conditions of your own focus is one of the most profound acts of self-determination available to you. In the next chapter, you are going to take everything you now understand about the brain, about clarity, and about environment, and build it into a complete daily structure, a routine that protects your attention from morning to night without requiring constant willpower or perfect circumstances. The blueprint is practical, flexible, and built around the way your brain actually works rather than the way productivity culture wishes it did. Chapter 7. The Focused Mind Routine, Morning to Night Habits that Protect Your Attention. Imagine two people waking up at exactly the same time tomorrow morning. Same alarm, same hour, same amount of sleep behind them. The first person reaches for their phone before their eyes have fully adjusted to the light. Within 3 minutes they are processing notifications, reacting to messages, absorbing news, and responding to other people's agendas. Their nervous system, which was calm and clear just moments ago, is now running at a low level of reactive alert. By the time they sit down to work, their mind is already fragmented, carrying the residue of a dozen different inputs, none of which they chose. The second person does something different. They leave the phone where it spent the night, in another room. They spend the first few minutes in silence. They move their body briefly. They review their North Star statement. They identify the single most important thing they will do today before anything else competes for their attention. And then they begin. Same morning. Same world. Completely different minds walking into it. By noon, the gap between what these two people have produced, how they feel, and how present they have been in every interaction they have had is not small. It is significant. And it compounds every single day. The difference between those 2 mornings is not talent, circumstance, or luck. It is structure. And structure, as this chapter is going to show you, is not a constraint on your freedom. It is the foundation of it. Most people think about routines the way they think about diets, as temporary disciplines imposed on an otherwise free life, to be maintained until willpower runs out and normal life resumes. That understanding is precisely why most routines fail. A routine built on willpower is a routine with an expiration date. What this chapter is offering is something fundamentally different. A routine built not on forcing yourself to do things you do not want to do, but on understanding how your brain's attention naturally operates throughout the day and structuring your life to work with that rhythm rather than against it. The result is not a rigid schedule that controls you. It is a flexible architecture that protects you, protects your best thinking, your deepest work, your most important relationships, and your inner sense of clarity from the constant erosion of a world designed to fragment all of them. The neuroscience behind this approach begins with what researchers call the ultradian rhythm, the 90 to 120-minute cycles of neurological arousal and recovery that your brain moves through continuously throughout the waking day. During the high arousal phase of each cycle, your prefrontal cortex is operating at or near peak capacity. Your ability to engage in complex, demanding, focused work is at its highest. During the recovery phase, your brain is consolidating information, processing experience, and preparing for the next cycle of high performance. Most people override the recovery phase with stimulation, reaching for coffee, checking their phone, jumping immediately into another demanding task. This override feels productive in the short term but accelerates cognitive depletion across the day. The brain that is never allowed to recover is the brain that runs out of focus capacity by mid-afternoon and spends the rest of the day in a fog of reactive, low-quality thinking. Understanding these cycles is not academic. It is the practical foundation for building a daily structure that actually works. In your relationships, the absence of a protective daily structure creates a specific kind of damage that is rarely discussed honestly. When you have no intentional structure to your day, your emotional and cognitive resources are distributed randomly, often depleted by low-priority demands before the high-priority people in your life ever receive your best attention. Your partner gets the exhausted version of you because the fresh, present version was given to email. Your children get the distracted version of you because the clear, patient version was consumed by reactive scrolling. Your closest friendships receive the leftover version of you because you gave the most alert hours of your day to things that mattered far less. A focused mind routine is not just a productivity tool. It is an act of love, a commitment to showing up for the people who matter most with something real to offer rather than the depleted remainder of a day that was never intentionally structured. In your career and finances, the compounding effect of a consistent focused routine is one of the most reliable wealth-building mechanisms available to any person at any income level. Not because it magically creates opportunities, but because it ensures that your highest cognitive capacity is consistently applied to your highest value activities. Every professional who has made a significant leap, from competent to exceptional, from employed to entrepreneurial, from financially stressed to financially stable, will, upon examination, reveal some version of a protected daily structure that separated their deep work from their reactive work. The structure itself varies. The principle behind it is universal. Your most valuable thinking must be protected from your least important demands. Otherwise, the least important demands will always win, not because they are stronger, but because they are louder. The concept this chapter is built around is what we will call attention architecture, the deliberate sequencing of your day's activities to align with your brain's natural performance rhythms while creating protected zones for your most important work. Unlike a traditional schedule, which organizes time, attention architecture organizes cognitive energy. The question it asks is not what will I do at what time. It is what kind of thinking does each part of my day require, and when in my neurological cycle am I best equipped to do it. That reframe alone changes everything about how a day is designed. The first tool is called the morning mind lock, and it is the single most impactful adjustment most people can make to their daily focus. Here is the exact practice. From the moment you wake until you have completed your most important focused work of the day, which we will define in a moment, you do not consume. You do not check messages. You do not read news. You do not scroll. You do not open email. You begin the day as a creator, not a consumer. Specifically, wake and spend the first 5 minutes in silence or with slow, deliberate movement. Review your North Star statement. Identify your single most important task for the day, the one thing that, if completed, will make the day genuinely successful regardless of what else happens. Then work on that task first, before anything else, for a minimum of 60 minutes without interruption. The neurological reason this works is rooted in what researchers call decision fatigue and ego depletion, the progressive exhaustion of your brain's executive control resources as the day advances. Your prefrontal cortex is at its most powerful in the early hours. Every minute you spend in reactive consumption before doing your most important work is a minute of your peak cognitive capacity given to someone else's agenda. The morning mind lock reclaims that peak window and gives it to what matters most. The second tool is called strategic recovery, the deliberate, structured use of your brain's natural recovery phases to sustain high performance across the full day rather than burning out by early afternoon. Here is how it works. After every 60 to 90 minutes of focused work, you take a genuine recovery break of 10 to 15 minutes. Not a break where you check your phone. Not a break where you switch to a different demanding task. A genuine recovery break, a short walk, 5 minutes of eyes closed breathing, a brief movement practice, or simply sitting quietly without any input. The distinction between a real recovery break and a stimulation break is critical. Scrolling your phone during a break does not rest your prefrontal cortex. It depletes it further through a different mechanism. A genuine recovery break allows the ultradian rhythm to complete its cycle, which means the next focused work session begins with nearly full cognitive capacity rather than the diminished capacity of a brain that was never allowed to reset. Over a full working day, the compounding difference in focus quality between someone using strategic recovery and someone powering through without it is not marginal. It is profound. The third tool, and the one most people overlook entirely, is what we will call the evening reset protocol. Most people end their workday the same way they spend it, reactively, without clear closure, carrying unfinished mental threads into their personal time and ultimately into their sleep. Research from psychologist Bluma Zygarnik demonstrated that the brain continues to actively process and return to unfinished tasks, what we now call the Zygarnik effect, until those tasks are either completed or explicitly handed off to a future time. This means that the emails you did not answer, the decisions you did not make, and the tasks you did not complete continue to consume background cognitive resources into the evening, fragmenting your ability to be present with the people you love and degrading the quality of your sleep. The evening reset protocol addresses this directly. At the end of each working day, spend 10 minutes doing 3 things. Write down everything unfinished and assign each item a specific future time when it will be addressed. Review what you accomplished and acknowledge it honestly, not just what remains but what was actually done. And then make one clear decision about your single most important task for the following morning so that your next day begins with direction rather than confusion. This 10-minute practice closes the cognitive loops that would otherwise follow you through your evening. It gives your brain permission to stop processing work and be fully present for whatever, and whoever, the rest of the day holds. In the real world, the leaders and creators who sustain extraordinary output across decades, rather than burning brilliantly for a few years, all share some version of this structural approach. Charles Darwin worked in focus blocks of exactly 90 minutes, 3 times a day, and spent the rest of his time in recovery activities, walking, reading, family time, that he treated as seriously as the work itself. Maya Angelou, as you learned in the previous chapter, had not just a focus zone but a complete daily rhythm built around protecting her creative peak hours from any form of reactive demand. These structures were not signs of privilege or luxury. They were the deliberate choices of people who understood that sustained excellence is not produced by working harder within a broken structure. It is produced by building a structure that makes excellence the natural output of a well-designed day. Here is the nuance that this chapter requires. A routine only works if it fits your actual life, not the idealized version of your life that productivity books tend to assume. You may have young children who do not respect your morning mind lock. You may work shifts that make morning focus blocks structurally impossible. You may be in a season of life where the circumstances genuinely do not allow for textbook attention architecture. This is not a reason to abandon the principle. It is a reason to apply it at whatever scale your life currently permits. Even 15 minutes of protected morning focus before the household wakes is 15 minutes more than the reactive alternative. Even a single strategic recovery break in an otherwise chaotic workday changes the quality of thinking that follows it. The principle scales down without losing its power. Start where you are. Build what you can. The structure grows as the practice deepens. You began this chapter with two people waking up at the same time and walking into completely different days. You are ending it knowing exactly what created that difference and exactly how to replicate it in your own life. The focused mind routine is not a perfect day template. It is a set of principles that, applied consistently in whatever form your life allows, will gradually transform not just how much you accomplish, but how it feels to move through your days. More present. More powerful. More like the person you have always known, somewhere underneath the noise, that you were capable of being. In the next chapter, we go to the place that most productivity content never reaches, the emotional and psychological roots of chronic distraction. Because everything you have built in this audiobook so far will only reach its full power when you address not just how you focus, but why focus has been so difficult. The answer, for many people, changes everything. Chapter 8, Emotional Triggers and the Inner Chaos, Healing the Root Cause of Chronic Distraction. There is a moment that most people have never stopped to examine honestly. It happens in the space between sitting down to do something important and actually doing it. You have cleared the desk. You have silenced the phone. You have removed the external obstacles that previous chapters addressed. The environment is right. The intention is real. And yet something still pulls you away. Not a notification. Not a colleague. Not an external demand of any kind. Something internal. A subtle discomfort that rises the moment you get close to the work. A restlessness that has no clear source. A gravitational pull toward literally anything else. The kitchen, a random thought, an imaginary errand that suddenly feels urgent. And you give into it, not because you are undisciplined, but because the discomfort of staying feels, in that moment, genuinely harder than the discomfort of leaving. You have experienced this. Perhaps many times. Perhaps so many times that you have begun to believe the problem is you. But the problem is not you. The problem is what you are running from. And until you understand what that is, no amount of environmental design or morning routines will reach the root of what is actually happening. This chapter goes to that root. And what you find there will not shame you. It will free you. What you just recognized in that scenario is the most honest and least discussed dimension of the focus conversation. Behavioral change without emotional understanding is renovation without foundation. It looks better for a while, but the cracks keep returning. This chapter is not going to abandon the practical tools you have been building. It is going to give them roots deep enough to hold in the hardest seasons of your life. Because focus, at its deepest level, is not a cognitive skill. It is an emotional one. And the person who understands that is already ahead of 90% of the productivity conversation. Here is what the research reveals. Psychologist Timothy Pychyl at Carleton University has spent decades studying procrastination, which is one of the primary behavioral expressions of chronic distraction, and his findings reframe the entire conversation. Procrastination, he found, is not a time management problem. It is an emotion management problem. People do not avoid tasks because the tasks are difficult. They avoid tasks because the tasks generate negative emotional states, anxiety, self-doubt, fear of failure, boredom, resentment, and distraction is the brain's fastest available strategy for escaping those states. The phone, the snack, the unnecessary errand. None of these are chosen consciously as avoidance mechanisms. They are reached for automatically, impulsively, as emotional exits from an internal experience that feels too uncomfortable to sit with. Understanding this does not make you weak. It makes you honest. And honesty is the only starting point from which real change becomes possible. The neuroscience beneath this is rooted in the relationship between your amygdala and your prefrontal cortex, two brain regions you have encountered in earlier chapters, but whose relationship is worth examining more closely here. The amygdala is your brain's threat detection center. It processes emotional signals and initiates the stress response with extraordinary speed, far faster than your rational, planning mind can engage. When a task generates feelings of inadequacy, fear, or uncertainty, the amygdala registers those feelings as threat signals and initiates an avoidance response before your conscious mind has had a chance to evaluate the situation rationally. This is why you can know with complete rational clarity that you need to work on something important and still find yourself doing something completely different 20 minutes later. The amygdala did not ask for your opinion. It simply acted. And without the tools to work with this dynamic consciously, most people remain trapped in a cycle of intention followed by avoidance, followed by shame, followed by more avoidance. A cycle that distraction makes perpetual. Bring this into your relationships and the emotional dimension of distraction becomes even more visible. Many people use distraction as a way of avoiding the emotional labor that deep relationships require. The difficult conversation that needs to happen. The vulnerability that genuine intimacy demands. The presence that loving someone fully requires you to bring even on the days when your own inner world is turbulent. Reaching for the phone, staying late at work, filling every quiet moment with noise. These are not just productivity problems. They are relationship protection mechanisms. Ways of maintaining a safe emotional distance from the full weight of being truly known by another person. And the cost of that distance, as Chapter 2 explored, is not dramatic or sudden. It is the quiet erosion of the connection that matters most to you, happening so gradually that you barely notice it until the distance has become the dominant feature of the relationship. In your career and finances, emotional avoidance distraction is responsible for some of the most significant and consistent patterns of underperformance that intelligent, capable people experience. The business idea that never gets started because starting means risking failure. The difficult professional conversation that keeps getting postponed because having it means risking rejection. The financial plan that never gets made because making it means confronting the reality of where things currently stand. In every one of these cases, the avoidance is not laziness. It is emotional self-protection. The brain is doing exactly what it was designed to do, minimize pain and maximize safety. But safety and growth live in different neighborhoods. And the brain's short-term emotional comfort comes at the price of your long-term potential. Inside, in that private inner world, chronic emotional avoidance distraction creates one of the most painful experiences a human being can have, the experience of being a stranger to yourself. When you never sit still long enough to feel what you actually feel, to think what you actually think, to hear the quiet voice underneath all the noise, you lose the thread of your own inner life. And a person who has lost that thread is not free. They are adrift. Busy but lost. Active but deeply, quietly lonely in a way that is difficult to explain even to the people closest to them. The concept at the center of this chapter is what we will call emotional distraction mapping, the practice of identifying the specific emotional states that consistently trigger your avoidance behavior so that you can begin working with them consciously rather than being unconsciously controlled by them. The Stoic philosopher Marcus Aurelius practiced a version of this in his private journals, a rigorous, honest examination of his own inner states, motivations, and patterns, not for public consumption but for personal clarity. He wrote that the first rule is to keep an untroubled spirit, and the second is to look things in the face and know them for what they are. His second rule is the foundation of emotional distraction mapping. You cannot change what you refuse to look at. And what you look at clearly, with honesty rather than judgment, immediately begins to lose its unconscious power over you. The first tool this chapter offers is called the trigger identification practice. Here is exactly how it works. For 1 week, every time you catch yourself moving into distraction, reaching for the phone, switching tasks, finding a suddenly urgent alternative to the work in front of you, you pause for 30 seconds and ask yourself one honest question. What was I feeling in the moment just before I moved away? Not what were you thinking. What were you feeling? Write the answer down in 1 or 2 words. Anxious, inadequate, bored, overwhelmed, uncertain, resentful. You are not analyzing it at this stage. You are simply collecting data. At the end of the week, look at your list. Most people find that 2 or 3 emotional states account for the vast majority of their avoidance behavior. Knowing your specific emotional triggers is not just psychologically interesting. It is strategically essential because it allows you to prepare for them rather than being ambushed by them. You cannot intercept what you cannot anticipate. And you cannot anticipate what you have never honestly named. The second tool is called the sit and stay practice, and it is perhaps the most genuinely difficult tool in this entire audiobook, which is precisely why it is also the most powerful. Here is the practice. The next time you feel the pull of emotional avoidance distraction, the discomfort that rises when you get close to important work, instead of acting on the impulse to leave, you stay. Not forever. Not until the discomfort disappears. You stay for 60 seconds. You place your hands on the desk or in your lap. You breathe slowly and deliberately. You let the discomfort be there without trying to fix it or escape it. And you simply observe it. What does it feel like physically? Where does it live in your body? Is it tightness in the chest? Restlessness in the legs? A kind of mental buzzing? You name it. You observe it. And then, and this is the part that changes everything, you notice that it did not destroy you. The discomfort that felt like an emergency was survivable. Completely survivable. And having survived it once, you have recalibrated what your nervous system believes is possible. Each time you sit and stay, the emotional exit becomes slightly less automatic. The space between the trigger and the behavior grows slightly wider. And in that widening space, your genuine freedom lives. In the real world, the most creatively and professionally productive people in history were not people who never felt fear, doubt, or emotional discomfort. They were people who developed the capacity to create in the presence of those feelings, rather than waiting for them to pass. Author Stephen Pressfield, in his examination of creative resistance, describes the emotional force that pushes us away from our most important work as the most reliable indicator that the work matters. The strength of the resistance, he argues, is directly proportional to the importance of the work being resisted. If what you are avoiding feels significant, that significance is not a reason to run. It is a signal that you are standing exactly where you need to be. Here is the nuance that this chapter requires above all others. Working with your emotional triggers is not the same as eliminating them. The goal of emotional distraction mapping and the sit and stay practice is not to become a person who never feels anxiety, self-doubt, or the discomfort of uncertainty. Those experiences are not pathological. They are human. The goal is to become a person who can feel those things and continue anyway. Who can recognize the emotional exit door without automatically walking through it. Who can distinguish between a feeling that is informing them and a feeling that is controlling them. Emotional mastery is not the absence of emotion. It is the presence of consciousness alongside emotion. That distinction is everything. You came into this chapter having built powerful external structures for focus, cleared environments, protective routines, clear North Stars. What this chapter has given you is the internal foundation that makes all of those structures sustainable. Because the person who understands their own emotional landscape is the person who can navigate the inevitable difficult days without abandoning the entire architecture. The person who has learned to sit with discomfort rather than run from it is the person who can do the work that matters even when doing it feels hard. And the work that matters, the relationships built with full presence, the career built with deep sustained attention, the inner life built with honest self-awareness, that work is what a focused life is ultimately for. In the next chapter, we move into the final act of this journey. You have the awareness. You have the tools. You have the emotional foundation. Now we bring it all together into the ultimate test, how to maintain everything you have built when life gets loud, unpredictable, and difficult. Because the focused life is not built in ideal conditions. It is proven in the hardest ones. Chapter 9, Focus Under Fire. How to stay locked in when life gets loud. Think about the last time everything fell apart at once. Not a mildly inconvenient day. A genuinely hard season. The kind where multiple things go wrong simultaneously and the weight of all of them lands on you at the same time. Maybe it was a financial crisis that arrived without warning, an unexpected bill, a lost contract, a business that stopped performing the way it needed to. Maybe it was a relationship fracturing under pressure that had been building for longer than you admitted. Maybe it was a personal loss, a health scare, a family emergency that rearranged your entire sense of what normal looked like. Or maybe it was something quieter but equally destabilizing, A prolonged period of uncertainty, of not knowing which direction things were going, of waking up every morning with a low-level dread that made concentration feel almost laughably impossible. In any of those seasons, someone probably told you to stay focused, to keep going, to not let circumstances derail your progress. And while the intention behind that advice was genuine, it landed the way most advice lands in the middle of a crisis, hollow. Because staying focused when life is calm is one skill. Staying focused when life is actively on fire is something else entirely. And almost nobody teaches you how to do it. This chapter teaches you how to do it. What you recognized in that scenario is the gap between focus as a fair weather practice and focus as a genuine life skill. Everything this audiobook has built, the environmental architecture, the morning routines, the emotional awareness, the clarity of your North Star, all of it was constructed under relatively stable conditions. This chapter is about what happens when those conditions disappear. Because they will disappear. Life does not honor your focus schedule. Chaos does not check whether you have completed your morning routine before arriving. And the measure of how deeply this work has taken root is not how well you focus when everything is going smoothly. It is how quickly you can return to focus when everything is not. The Stoic tradition has more to offer on this subject than almost any other philosophical framework in human history. Marcus Aurelius did not write meditations during peaceful philosophical retreats. He wrote it on military campaigns, during plagues, through the deaths of children, in the middle of political betrayals, and under the constant pressure of leading an empire through one crisis after another. And yet the journals he kept during those years reveal a mind that returned again and again to a specific and disciplined practice, the practice of distinguishing between what was within his control and what was not, and directing his full attention only toward the former. He wrote that you have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. This was not a philosophical position he held in comfort. It was a survival tool he used in chaos. And the precision with which he applied it is exactly what this chapter is going to give you. The neuroscience of focus under pressure reveals something both challenging and ultimately empowering. When the brain perceives threat, whether the threat is physical danger, financial stress, relational conflict, or prolonged uncertainty, the amygdala initiates a stress response that redirects neurological resources away from the prefrontal cortex and toward the more primitive survival systems. This is the biological reason why thinking clearly during a crisis feels so difficult. It is not weakness or lack of discipline. It is your nervous system doing exactly what it evolved to do, prioritizing immediate survival over long-term planning. The problem in the modern world is that most of the threats we face are not ones that benefit from a survival response. A financial problem is not solved by fight or flight. A relationship rupture is not healed by threat detection. A career challenge is not navigated by the part of the brain designed for predators. And yet that is the part of the brain most people are operating from when life gets hard. The result is reactive thinking at exactly the moment when thoughtful, focused attention is most needed. In your relationships, the impact of losing focus under pressure is felt immediately and painfully. When you are under stress, the people closest to you become the recipients of your most reactive, least considered responses. The patience you normally manage to maintain disappears. The presence you have been working to develop evaporates. The small relational frictions that you handle gracefully on a good day escalate into genuine conflicts on a hard one. And here is the painful irony. The people you most need during a difficult season are the ones most likely to be pushed away by the version of you that difficult seasons produce. Focus under fire is not just about maintaining professional output during chaos. It is about maintaining the quality of your presence with the people who need you and whom you need in equal measure. In your career and finances, the cost of losing focused thinking during high-pressure periods is compounded by the fact that high-pressure periods are almost always the moments when the quality of your decisions matters most. The financial crisis that requires a clear-headed strategic response gets instead a panic-driven reactive one. The career opportunity that emerges during a period of professional uncertainty gets missed because your attention is too fragmented to recognize and act on it. The business problem that requires your deepest creative thinking gets your most depleted, distracted mind, because the stress of the situation has consumed the cognitive resources that clarity requires. The people who navigate difficult professional and financial seasons successfully are not the ones who feel less stress. They are the ones who have developed the capacity to think clearly in the presence of stress. That capacity is not innate. It is built. And this chapter is going to show you exactly how to build it. The concept at the heart of this chapter is what we will call the pressure response protocol, a specific practice sequence of internal and external actions that you execute whenever life disrupts your focus, allowing you to return to clarity and intentional attention faster than your default stress response would allow. The mechanism behind why a protocol works under pressure is rooted in what psychologists call procedural memory, the type of memory that stores practice sequences and makes them available even when the prefrontal cortex is compromised by stress. Athletes train specific responses to high-pressure moments not so that they have to think their way through them in real time, but so that the trained response activates automatically when conscious thought is hardest. You are going to build the same thing for your focused mind. A practice sequence that returns you to clarity even when clarity feels furthest away. The first tool is called the 3-breath reset. It is the foundational step of the pressure response protocol and the one you will use most frequently because it is available in any moment, any environment, and any circumstance without exception. Here is the exact practice. The moment you notice that stress, chaos, or overwhelm has fractured your focus, whether you are at your desk in a difficult conversation, in a moment of financial panic, or in the middle of a family crisis, you stop. You take 3 deliberate, slow breaths. Not casual breaths. Deliberate ones. Inhale slowly through your nose for a count of 4. Hold for a count of 4. Exhale slowly through your mouth for a count of 6. 3 complete cycles. The neurological mechanism behind this is precise and powerful. The extended exhale activates the parasympathetic nervous system, the physiological counterpart to the stress response, which signals to the amygdala that the immediate threat level is reducing. Prefrontal cortex function begins to restore. The reactive fog begins to lift. 3 breaths is not a metaphor for calming down. It is a physiologically specific intervention that changes the neurochemical state of your brain within 60 seconds. It does not solve the problem that caused the stress, but it restores enough cognitive clarity to begin thinking about the problem rather than simply reacting to it. The second tool is called the controllable focus list. This is the cognitive companion to the 3-breath reset, the mental practice that follows the physiological reset and prevents your returned clarity from being immediately recaptured by the overwhelm of everything you cannot control. Here is how it works. Following your 3-breath reset, take a piece of paper or open a blank note and draw a simple line down the middle. On the left side, write everything related to the current situation that is outside your direct control. Other people's responses, external circumstances, outcomes that depend on factors beyond your influence. On the right side, write everything that is within your direct control. Your next action, your communication, your preparation, your response, your focus. Then fold the paper so the left side is hidden. For the duration of your next focused work session, the left side does not exist. You are working only from the right side. The Stoic principle underneath this tool is not passive acceptance of circumstances. It is the aggressive redirection of your finite cognitive energy toward the only territory where that energy can actually produce results. You cannot think your way into controlling what is uncontrollable, but you can think your way into the best possible response to it. And the best possible response always lives on the right side of the page. The third tool is called the minimum viable focus session. This is the tool for the days when the focused mind routine of Chapter 7 is simply not available, when the morning was consumed by a crisis, when the environment cannot be controlled, when the emotional weight of circumstances makes a full focused work session feel genuinely impossible. On those days, you do not aim for 90 minutes of deep work. You aim for 15. You identify one single action, not a project, not a goal, but one concrete, completable action that moves your most important work forward by even the smallest measurable amount. You do that one thing with whatever focus you can access. And then you stop. The psychological principle behind this tool is what researchers call the progress principle. The finding by Teresa Amabile at Harvard Business School that the single most powerful driver of positive inner work life, motivation, and cognitive engagement is the perception of making progress, however small, on meaningful work. On the hardest days, a 15-minute minimum viable focus session is not a compromise. It is a victory. It is the evidence your nervous system needs that the chaos has not won, that you are still moving, that the work is still happening. And that evidence, repeated across the difficult days, is what transforms a fair weather practice into a genuine life skill. In the real world, the people who sustain focused, meaningful output across genuinely difficult life circumstances are not superhuman. They are practiced. Winston Churchill maintained his writing and his strategic thinking through some of the darkest periods of the Second World War, not by being unaffected by the weight of what he was carrying, but by developing practice protocols for returning to clarity after the inevitable disruptions. Nelson Mandela spent 27 years in imprisonment and emerged not diminished, but with a quality of focused intentionality that many people who had lived in perfect freedom had never developed. Viktor Frankl, imprisoned in Nazi concentration camps, discovered that even in the most extreme deprivation of external freedom, the freedom to choose one's own response, to direct one's own attention, remained available. These are extreme examples, but the principle they illustrate operates at every scale of human difficulty. The capacity to return to focused intention after disruption is not reserved for historical figures facing historical circumstances. It is available to you in the difficult season you are navigating right now. Here is the nuance that this chapter must address directly. Focus under fire does not mean performing at your best during your worst moments. It does not mean suppressing the legitimate emotional weight of difficult circumstances in the name of productivity. Grief needs to be grieved. Crisis needs to be processed. The human experience of genuine difficulty is not a focus problem to be solved. It is a human reality to be honored. What this chapter is offering is not the toxic positivity of just keep going no matter what. It is the precise and compassionate skill of knowing how to return to intentional attention after you have given your difficult moments the honest acknowledgement they deserve. There is a time to stop and feel the full weight of what is hard. And there is a time to pick up the work again. The pressure response protocol does not eliminate the first time. It makes the second time possible. You came into this chapter knowing how to focus when life cooperates. You are leaving it knowing how to focus when it does not. That is not a small upgrade. In a life that will inevitably include seasons of genuine difficulty, and every life does, the difference between a person who can maintain their intentional direction through chaos and one who loses it entirely is not intelligence, not talent, not circumstance. It is the practiced capacity you have just built. The 3-breath reset. The controllable focus list. The minimum viable focus session. 3 tools small enough to use anywhere and powerful enough to change everything about how you navigate the hardest days of your life. In the final chapter of this journey, we bring everything together. Not as a summary but as a synthesis, a vision of the complete focused life that all of this work has been building toward. And a set of living principles that will carry you forward long after the last word of this audiobook has been spoken. Chapter 10. The Radically Focused Life. Building a Legacy one deep work session at a time. Do you remember the scenario that opened this audiobook? You sat down to do something that mattered. You had the time, the intention, and for one brief moment, the genuine belief that today would be different. And then something pulled you away, a notification, a thought, a feeling, a habit so deeply grooved that it operated below the level of conscious choice. You closed the tab. You put down the pen. You walked away. And underneath the familiar frustration, there was something quieter and heavier. The feeling that this keeps happening. That the gap between the person you are and the person you know you are capable of being never quite seems to close. That was where we began. That feeling of quiet, persistent longing is what brought you here. And now, 10 chapters later, something has changed. Not everything. Not all at once. But something real and foundational has shifted in the way you understand yourself, your attention, and what becomes possible when the two are finally aligned. This final chapter is not a summary. It is a arrival. The world you are navigating has not become easier. If anything, the forces competing for your attention have grown more sophisticated, more relentless, and more precisely calibrated to your specific vulnerabilities since the first day you picked up a smartphone. The distraction epidemic that Chapter 1 named is not retreating. The 7 types of distraction that Chapter 3 mapped are not disappearing. The emotional triggers that Chapter 8 surfaced are not going to stop arising. The difficult seasons that Chapter 9 prepared you for are not going to exempt you from their arrival. The world is what it is. Loud, fast, fragmented, and designed by powerful economic interests to keep you reactive, consuming, and distracted for as long as mechanically possible. Acknowledging this is not pessimism. It is the clear-eyed realism that the Stoics valued above almost every other intellectual virtue. You cannot build a focused life by pretending the obstacles are smaller than they are. You build it by becoming larger than the obstacles. And that is precisely what this journey has been preparing you to do. So let us trace what you have actually built across these 10 chapters. You began by understanding that your brain was never designed for the modern world, that the novelty bias, the dopamine loops, and the ancient threat detection systems that serve you in some contexts are being systematically exploited in others. That understanding removed the shame from the struggle and replaced it with something far more useful: strategic clarity about the actual battlefield. Then you felt the full weight of what a divided mind costs, not just in hours and productivity but in presence, in relationships, in the quiet grief of a life half-lived. You let that weight land. And letting it land created the genuine urgency that no external motivator can manufacture. You learned to identify distraction not as a single enemy but as a family of 7 distinct forces, each with its own mechanism and its own point of vulnerability. You stopped fighting a formless fog and started engaging a mapped terrain. You discovered that your brain is not fixed, that neuroplasticity is not a metaphor but a literal physical mechanism through which the focused mind is built one conscious return at a time. You developed the North Star clarity that gives focus somewhere real to land. You redesigned the environment that surrounds your attention every day. You built a daily structure aligned with your brain's natural rhythms. You went into the emotional roots of chronic distraction and found, with honesty rather than judgment, the specific feelings that had been running your avoidance behavior from below the surface. And you built the pressure response protocol that allows you to return to focused intention even when life gets loudest. Each chapter was not a standalone lesson. Each one was a layer. And together they have built something that no single insight, no single tool, and no single morning of motivation could ever build alone. They have built a practice. A way of moving through the world. A relationship with your own attention that is fundamentally different from the one you arrived with. Here is the most important clarification this audiobook can offer before it closes. Radical focus is not the elimination of distraction. It is the development of a practiced, compassionate, consistent capacity to return to what matters after distraction inevitably occurs. If you finish this audiobook expecting never to be distracted again, you will experience that expectation as failure within the first 24 hours. Your mind will wander. Life will interrupt. Hard days will arrive. The phone will beckon. Old emotional patterns will resurface. None of that is evidence that this work did not take hold. All of it is simply the normal experience of being a human being with a human brain in a human world. The difference, the one that this entire audiobook has been building toward, is what you do in the moment after the distraction. Whether you collapse into shame and abandon the practice, or whether you take one breath, name what happened, and return. That return is not a sign that you failed. It is the practice itself. It is the rep. It is the work. And every single time you choose it, you are becoming more of the person this chapter is about to describe. The ripple effect of a radically focused life extends far beyond you. Consider the relationship where your full presence, developed through months of consistent practice, begins to create a quality of connection that the people you love had stopped expecting and quietly longed for. Your partner feels genuinely seen in a way that changes the emotional temperature of the entire relationship. Your children receive a quality of attention that tells them, without words, that they are worth showing up for completely. Your friendships deepen from the surface-level exchange of two distracted people to the rare, nourishing experience of two people who are actually there with each other. The focused life is not a solitary achievement. It radiates. Every person who receives your genuine, undivided presence is changed by it in ways neither of you may fully see but both of you will feel. And in a world where genuine presence has become genuinely rare, the person who can offer it becomes someone worth knowing, worth trusting, and worth keeping close. In your career and your finances, the compounding effect of sustained focused attention over months and years produces results that look from the outside like exceptional talent or extraordinary luck. They are neither. They are the mathematical inevitability of consistently applied deep attention to high-value work. The person who spends 2 focused hours every morning on their most important professional contribution, protected by the environmental architecture and the morning mind lock you have built, will produce in 1 year what most people in their field produce in 3. Not because they work more hours. Because they work more deeply. And depth, in a world saturated with shallow reactive busyness, is the scarcest and most valuable professional commodity in existence. Your focused attention, applied consistently to what your North Star identifies as most important, is a wealth-building asset more reliable than almost any other available to you. Here are the living principles, the distilled essence of everything this audiobook has offered, that you can return to as your personal standard whenever the noise gets loud and the direction feels unclear. The first principle is this: your attention is your life. Not a resource you use to live your life. Your life itself. What you consistently attend to is what you consistently become. Guard it accordingly. The second principle is this: distraction is always an invitation to examine what you are avoiding. Before you judge yourself for losing focus, get curious about what the distraction was protecting you from feeling. The curiosity is more useful than the judgment every time. The third principle is this: clarity precedes focus. You cannot aim at nothing and expect to hit something that matters. Return to your North Star statement whenever the sense of direction fades. Let it do the orienting work so your energy can do the building work. The fourth principle is this: the environment is not neutral. Every space you inhabit is either making your most important behaviors easier or harder. Design intentionally and relentlessly. The architecture of your daily environment is the architecture of your daily life. The fifth principle is this: the return is the practice. Every time your attention wanders and you bring it back, in meditation, in work, in conversation, in the middle of a crisis, you are not failing at focus. You are doing it. The return is not the recovery from the exercise. It is the exercise itself. The sixth principle is this: a focused life is a generous life. The depth of presence you bring to your work, your relationships, and your inner world does not diminish what you have available for others. It multiplies it. You cannot give genuine attention from an empty reserve. Build yours deliberately and give from the overflow. Now close your eyes for a moment and see this clearly. 1 year from today, you wake up differently than you do right now. Not perfectly. Not without struggle. But differently. The morning begins with intention rather than reaction. The phone does not set the tone for your nervous system before you have had a moment to set it yourself. Your North Star is visible, not because life has become simple, but because you have done the work of making it clear. You sit down to your most important work and you stay. Not forever. Not without the occasional drift. But you stay in a way that produces something real. Something that carries the unmistakable quality of a mind that was fully present for its creation. The people in your life feel the difference. They feel reached. They feel met. They feel like they matter to you in a way that is demonstrated not just through words, but through the irreplaceable gift of your complete attention. Your work carries the depth that only sustained focus can produce. Your decisions carry the clarity that only an uncluttered mind can generate. Your inner life carries the peace that only comes from knowing you are living in alignment with what you actually value rather than being pulled along by what the world values on your behalf. That person is not a fantasy. That person is the natural outcome of the practice you have already begun. Here is the closing truth that this entire audiobook has been building toward. Through every chapter, every tool, every moment of honest reckoning with what distraction costs and what focus creates. In a world that profits from your distraction, choosing to focus is the most radical act of self-determination available to you. It is the declaration that your attention belongs to you, that your life will be lived by your design rather than by default, that the person you are becoming will be shaped by your deepest values rather than by the loudest noise. Focus is not a productivity strategy. It is a philosophy of living. And the life built on that philosophy, one deep, present, intentional moment at a time, is not just a more productive life. It is a more fully human one. Now go build it. One breath at a time. One return at a time. One radically focused day at a time. If this audiobook moved something in you, if even one chapter gave you a new way to see yourself and what you are capable of, subscribe to this channel right now. Every week, this channel releases new audiobooks and deep dive content built for people who are serious about their growth, their mindset, and the life they are actively constructing. Subscribe, hit the notification bell, and share this audiobook with one person in your life who needs to hear it. The next audiobook in this series goes even deeper, into the psychology of discipline, the neuroscience of habit, and the specific daily practices that turn intention into identity. You have done the work of awareness. The next chapter builds the life that awareness makes possible. We will see you there.